While everyone is releasing M.2 SSDs and pushing the limit of both speeds and endurance, PHIXERO releases a SATA-based SSD using the old-style 2.5-inch form factor. This SSD is meant to be affordable and is advertised to deliver reading speeds of 500 MB per second and writing speeds of 480 MB per second. However, given the constant price dropping of M.2 SSDs lately, especially those that are more on the basic side in terms of performance, how can this 2.5-inch SSD compete? M.2 SSDs are now everywhere, from desktop computers to notebooks and even gaming consoles, and hard drives are reserved for mass storage such as servers or personal network attached solutions. The PHIXERO P500 1TB is a simple SATA SSD, and thus its design is simple as well. In truth, there isn't much you can do with a SATA based SSD in terms of the design, unless of course we are talking about adding RGB LEDs to the casing and some fancy graphics, but all in all SSDs are the same. When we talk about the pricing, this SSD is affordable, at least when we talk about the 1TB variant we have in this review, for just shy of $55 US, at least at the time of this review. It is a good value for money SSD, even though we've already seen some cost-cutting measures in place. Speaking of which, some cost-cutting has been made with the case of this SSD. While many SATA SSDs have cases made from metal, the PHIXERO P500 1TB has a case made from plastic. It's good quality plastic and it does work just fine as a case, but it's plastic and not metal. To open the SSD, you only need a sharp screwdriver or a butter knife, as the two sides of the SSD are held in place with a few clips. Once those are released, the SSD is opened and we get to see a familiar sight, a small PCB inside the big case. And if you're wondering why is the case so big when the SSD itself is so small, well, the entire tech industry is made using form factors, and this SSD is no different, as the case has to be in the 2.5-inch form factor to fit inside notebooks and desktop computers. The highlight of this SSD is the controller. Made by Realtek, it is the RayMX RM1135, a controller we do not often see in the wild, especially on SATA SSDs. I could not find much about this controller apart from the fact that it has been used on both SATA and M.2 SSDs in the past, and that's about it. Fortunately, the memory chips used on this 1TB drive are known. They are made by Intel and are using the QLC technology. Unfortunately, this SSD does not have a DRAM chip for its cache, and thus, once the cache fills, the speed will drop, but we shall see about that in a minute or two. The testing is done using a modern DDR5 based system, which uses an Intel i7 13700K CPU and an RTX 3090 Super graphics card. The first test is the file copy test. We first start with the duplicate folder that has a total file size of 50 GB, and here the speed starts off really good at over 7 GB per second, but it quickly drops to what we were expecting, 480 and 490 MB per second, and then the cache is filled up and the speed drops to around 200 MB per second and remains there until the end of the file transfer. This shows us that the cache size on this 1TB SSD is no less than 35 GB, which is not a lot from a 1TB drive, but it's cheap, so we can move past that. The second file copy test uses the same methodology, but instead of duplicating a 50 GB folder, we are duplicating a 100 GB folder, and the behavior repeats itself, only that the speed starts off at 500 MB per second and then stays at 500 MB per second until the cache is filled, and then it drops down to 200 MB per second. Overall, it's not a bad performance for a DRAM-less SATA drive, but it could have been better, or at least have its cache size bigger. The first synthetic benchmark is Crystal Disk Mark, now at version 8. This is a popular benchmark due to its simplicity and the fact that it is free, easy to use, and can be had as a portable piece of software. And here, the PHIXERO P500 1TB is on the lower part of the chart next to the crucial MX 500 1TB, and this is the case for both the reading and the writing tests with Crystal Disk Mark. Next, we have Auto Disk Benchmark. This is a benchmark that is popular because it uses multiple file sizes to test the storage devices, in our case the SSD, and here the P500 1TB is right next to the crucial MX 500 1TB, but not ahead because it lacks a DRAM chip. Finally, we have a video game to test, and we use Shadow of the Tomb Raider, an older title that is reliable and delivers good results for storage drive testing. And here, the story is more or less the same, with the P500 1TB on the same level as the crucial MX 500. In terms of the temperatures, there is little to no concern with this SSD. Even though it uses a plastic casing which does nothing in terms of cooling, it uses a controller that does not heat up, and the same can be said for the memory chips. Seeing these results, we can conclude that the PHIXERO P500 1TB is a simple SSD that is affordable and offers a good performance for what it is, a SATA SSD. Comparing this type of SSD with M.2 SSDs or worse, PCIe 4.0 SSDs is wrong, as these are part of an older technology. The build quality is good, even though a plastic case is not the best thing in the world. Nevertheless, given that the SSD does not heat up that much and the casing will not withstand any kind of pressure, we can give it a pass. In terms of the performance, things are looking good for, again, what is a SATA SSD. Unfortunately, it does not have a DRAM cache, and thus the speed will suffer once the cache is filled. To mitigate the speed drop, I'd recommend you to keep your file transfers in short batches, around 40 to 50 GB per file transfer. This way, you will get the most out of this SSD. From a price perspective, the PHIXERO P500 1TB is cheap, but not really cheap when compared to other SATA SSDs that are in the 1TB variety. It's just another viable option for a basic office system or a notebook that does not have an M.2 SSD socket. If you like this review, then you might consider subscribing for more, and if you want to support me in a direct way, then in the description below you will find the links for both the Patreon and the Subscriber Star pages of this channel.